Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. Our guest today is Mr. Mitchell Tsai, and he's the International Liaison of Taiwan Environmental Action Network. So Mitchell, tell us about your organization, TEEN.
Well, TEEN was founded back in 1998 by a group of Taiwanese, overseas Taiwanese students, actually, mostly living in the United States. And what in particular they were focusing on was opposing the Binan petrochemical factory and building because it was about to be built on this nesting ground of a particularly special Taiwanese bird called the black-faced spoonbill.
That's right.
So that's what sort of got a lot of them motivated. But the history of the Taiwanese environmental movement runs a lot older than TEEN. In fact, yeah, I'd say we're a younger generation of activists.
That's
yes.
right. But you was now relocated to Taiwan 2 years ago, right?
It was really well. A lot of those students graduated and moved back here, and so that's why they established TEEN in Taiwan as well. Yeah.
Okay, so those people working in the TEEN are mainly the younger generation of so-called environmental activists.
Yeah.
What are the major issues that you are more concerned about now?
Well, in particular, right now we're working on two important issues. One is toxic waste coming from the electronic industry here in Taiwan, and our second big issue is global warming. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And how many staffers you have? You know. In general, it's a small, medium-sized NGOs, right?
Well, we have about over 100 members, in fact, within our network. But we only have, in terms of staff, in terms of actual hardcore staff, we only have about 2 people in our offices.
So there are many volunteers in the organization.
Yeah, it's almost all volunteer organizations.
Are they all from the academic community, or you know?
A lot of them are from the academic community, but many of them are, because a lot of them are professors focusing on environmental science or political science, but a lot of them are also simply members of the community. When we first came to Taiwan, yes, most of us were almost all university professors, but as time has gone on, we actually have gotten a lot more local Taiwanese community members as well that come from different backgrounds, such as engineering and things like that.
What are the activities or programs you have, in terms of promoting the awareness of the environmental protection?
Well, the particular issue that I work on is climate change. That's my half of the pie, and what I've worked on is we have 2 projects. One of them is called Global Climate Campaign, and what it is that it's an international network of climate change activists, actually, who every year they have a day of action where they worked day of action to around the time of the UN climate change talks, when the Kyoto signatories get together to discuss what's going to happen after 2012 when the Kyoto Protocol expires, and also current ongoing steps in the Kyoto process. Around that time, there's one day where they'll always set aside. This year it's December 8th, 2007, that more countries all around the world will simultaneously hold protests to show, or activities to show, international consensus to stop global warming. And for the first, last year actually, in 2006, was the first time that Taiwan participated. Yes.
So you are the local host of this program, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And also, you say that the toxic waste is also one of your concerns for the organization.
Yeah, toxic waste is another one of our concerns. We work with companies such as ASUS or Honghai, and we met with them to discuss their environmental impacts of their community, on their environmental impact on local communities. That include toxic waste, proper disposal of toxic waste, reducing their their consumption of water and electricity, and issues like that. We want the electronics industry. What it's notorious for is toxic waste. One is mortality of it. The people who work in the IT industry show an inordinate high amount of, particularly engineers working in the factories, show an inordinate amount, high rate of cancer and other toxic-related diseases. Here in Taiwan, in fact, one of the issues that we're working on is I believe it's in Taoyuan County. There's a case involving a company called RCA, that's currently owned by GE. And even though they closed their factory back in the 1980s, today people in Taoyuan continue protesting the RCA company, because what they did before closing the plant was was directly dump a lot of the toxic waste that was created from making televisions, mostly cathode tubes, I believe, dump them directly into the groundwater. And so the impacts, the plant was only open for maybe 10, 20 years, but its environmental impacts have lasted a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you talk to the high-tech people, especially the bosses, high-tech people, do you tend to see you as a partner or competitor or even a campaigner of the environmental protection?
Well, I definitely wouldn't say we're partners with the companies, but at the same time, I'd say that our primary strategy is to, one is to place pressure on the issue, to bring attention to the issue. But our second part is actually to work with the companies themselves to help them understand the issue, because oftentimes a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of the companies simply just aren't aware of this kind of the kind of issues that have been happening, health issues and their environmental impact. I think one of the interesting things when you talk about Taiwan is that recently the EU issued a regulation saying that no computer parts that could be imported into the EU could be made with lead. They banned lead and they banned a number of other toxic materials that actually has a really big direct impact on factory workers' health. It's occupational safety sort of issue. But the companies and so this regulation sort of trickled down to Taiwan because Taiwanese companies were asked to take lead out of their manufacturing processes. But Taiwanese companies in particular have been very successful in being able to remove these materials from their processes. Although at the same time, when they export to countries that aren't subject to EU regulations, they still tend to use those kinds of materials. Yes.
You are the international liaison of the team, so there must be some international cooperations or joint efforts in dealing with the issue. What other international networks do you have now?
Well, I talked about Global Climate Campaign earlier, but another one of our big projects is we work with ICLEI, which is a program under the UN Environmental Program. With getting Taiwanese cities to try to join, ICLEI to begin the process of taking CO2 inventories, counting how much traffic goes through our cities, how much CO2 does that generate, how much CO2 does the electricity we use generate, that kind of impact, and trying to imbue awareness into local Taiwanese city governments. Kaohsiung City Government just joined last year. They were the first Taiwanese city to join, and we're looking forward to welcoming many other cities as well.
Yeah. And are you also working with other international non-governmental organizations or any local NGOs in other countries?
Well, we work with other international NGOs such as Climate Action Network, which is a network of over 1,400 environmental organizations concerned about climate change. And what they do is that they work collectively to represent the view of environmental organizations at big UN meetings and be able to push for things collectively. But one of the big difficulties with Taiwan's political situation and international cooperation is that they're not able to officially attend these kinds of events. And so, for example, our name Taiwan Environmental Action Network doesn't work when we have to go on the international stage. And so oftentimes we work with international NGOs such as Climate Action Network to be able to attend these kinds of events.
A lot of people say that the most challenge for the global warming issue and the environmental protection issue is China.
Yes.
And in other words, the rise of China is also the rise of many problems, environmental problems, economic problems, and so on. Do you work with any NGOs in China in dealing with the issue?
Well, that's one of the big things is that one of our big issues with toxic waste in the electronics industry is that we work a lot with Greenpeace China, in fact, on monitoring Taiwanese companies who are working in China, U.S. companies who are working in China. So it's one of those things where, because of international trade and because of the international economy that we have these days, when one country decides to ban certain types of, implement some sort of environmental regulation, it simply moves to another part of the country, which is why the environmental movement has been going international, because it's absolutely necessary. Okay. Yes.
In general, NGOs are very limited in terms of resources, right?
Yes.
And it's even more tougher for NGOs in Taiwan, you know.
Yeah.
So what are the most unforgettable memories that when you were working now in Taiwan's NGOs? What's the most difficult part of working as an NGO in Taiwan?
Well, I'd say difficult part. Well,
let's start with the most fulfilling part of NGO activities in Taiwan.
Well, I guess the fulfilling part is that you work hard, you work extra hard every single day to try to make a positive difference in people's lives. Mm-hmm. You know, to make a positive difference in society. It's not that environmental NGOs think that our viewpoint is always right, you know. But what we do think is that we represent a perspective, and we represent a set of views that contribute something valuable to society. Yeah. And so for me personally, being able to work has been a great gift because I get to actively interact with a lot of people, and I just have a great time, you know. Mm-hmm. I started about 4 years ago in college working with the environmental movement. It's just been fantastic.
And what are the most difficult parts in terms of running NGO or promoting environmental protection consciousness in Taiwan?
Well, I wouldn't say Taiwan in particular is difficult, even more than, for example, like I was talking with at least in Taiwan you can speak freely, because I remember talking with some of my friends at Greenpeace China, and they were talking about how Greenpeace in China as opposed to outside of China is in China they're a much more conservative organization. They have to be a lot more careful with what they publicly say. Yeah. And but in Taiwan, I think the biggest challenge is that awareness, I guess, of environmental issues. The general public still isn't actively aware of environmental issues. And also, the fact is that charitable giving or civil society support of social movements is still developing here in Taiwan. But I think one of the great things that you can say is that it's growing very rapidly. For example, recently there's a report that said people who are recorded as contributing to public charities has hit its highest level recently just this year, and it continues to grow at a rapid rate. So I think that you can see that Taiwan society, in terms of this direction, hasn't developed is still developing, but it's developing very rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah. Look to the future. Do you think that there will be a important step forward in terms of environmental protection in Taiwan with joint efforts by the government and NGOs in Taiwan?
Yeah, I do see a bright future for Taiwan, for Taiwan's environmental movement, for Taiwan's environment in general. I think that it's because NGOs, government, and the private sector, all we represent different ideas and different elements within society that. And we're working together. But I think that Taiwan's environmental policy has improved rapidly over the next 10 years. I expect it to improve just as much in the next 10 years as well. Yeah.
I know you'll be going back to the States to get your go to law school.
Yeah.
After you go back, do you think that you will continue to work on these issues when you're in the States?
Yeah, it's always been my dream to become an environmental lawyer, and so that's my hope to do that after the next 3 years. Yeah, if I can survive the next 3 years. Yeah.
Do the experiences you have now in China help you in that regard?
My experience. I think so a lot, because I think that one of the things is that when you work as an activist, is that you have to work really hard to understand people from a different perspective. And so when I was working in Los Angeles as a student activist and it was the same thing, but coming to Taiwan is the same thing but twice as hard, because when I'm working in a language that I wasn't as good, I'm not as good with as I am with English. So it's one of those big things that I had to struggle with. And also, people's perspective in Taiwan is very different. The way they discuss issues, the way in the working culture is very different as well. But that's also the most satisfying part, because I think if it wasn't hard, then there wouldn't be any fun to it, right? Yeah. So I think that's been my most rewarding part about coming to Taiwan is learning so much. Yeah.
And thank you, Mitchell, for coming to our program, and thank you all the works that you've been doing for Taiwan.
I was very glad to be here as well. Yes.
Thank you. And that's Mitchell Tsai, International Liaison of Taiwan Environmental Action Network. And thank you for watching Taiwan Outlook, and see you next week.